Welcome to the pilot episode of Discipleship Video Online. I'll be your pilot today, Fisk. Wait, Forrest. Just because it's a pilot episode doesn't mean that you actually have to look like a pilot. You know that, right?
Wait, nobody told me that.
Well, nobody needed to tell you. A pilot episode is usually the first episode, usually filmed for broadcasting agencies, so they can tell if they want to spend money filming a whole series or not. It has nothing to do with airplane pilots.
Oh, so I'm not needed?
No, but it's okay. Go ahead and introduce the video.
Are you sure?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Today, for our first and pilot episode, we are going to be interviewing a local pastor in the Kansas City area in the Church of the Nazarene. Currently, in the year 2012, he is the General Director for Information Technologies at the seminary that we went to, Nazarene Theological Seminary. Basically, he's the IT guy. This being the pilot episode, I want to apologize for any audio sound quality issues we might have. His microphone was off, and mine was the only one recording sound, so we had to do some awesome fixes. Thank you very much, David Sills. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the interview. Thank you. See you later. So just tell me your name, what church you go to, how long it's been since your call, how long you've been pastoring, and just tell me your story in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then we'll kind of have a Q&A session at the end, okay?
Okay. My name is Bob Thomas. I'm one of these folks that have had the privilege of having the Lord move pretty specifically in my life and pretty powerfully in my life. Not everybody gets that opportunity to do that. Most folks I know, don't sense the Lord moving as directly. But I think the Lord knew that I'm kind of bullheaded and hard-headed, and I would need that extra push, and so He's arranged to do that over and over. I got my call originally when I was 8 years old. My family was worshiping at a Methodist church in Grove City, Ohio. And I was an altar boy. I'd asked to be an altar boy. I wanted to, some part of me was drawn to that whole activity that happened up in the front of the church up there. It's kind of an amazing thing. And I remember at one point I was lighting the candles and setting the books up and doing all the stuff the altar boys are supposed to do. And I sat down and I watched the pastor walk up to the pulpit. Huge man. And this thought hit me, and it was different than another thought. It was different than how thoughts normally work, but it hit me as if it was a truth, that's what you need to be doing. And as an 8-year-old, my options was what? I accepted it. I didn't have any other way to function, so I accepted that and recognized at some point I would be doing something like that. I wanted to be like this guy, this wonderful pastor. And then through high school and the drug scene and the craziness of life, lost track of all of that and I wasn't there anymore. But the one thing I've learned about God's call is once the Lord speaks, He does not revoke His language. Once the word of the Lord has gone out, Scripture tells us it doesn't come back empty. And so He had indeed made a call in my life, and it didn't matter what kind of craziness I did or how far I went or what I'd done in the intervening years. That call was still active. And it was interesting how that call played itself out. There's a few stories I could tell at some point that are where the Lord clearly had His hand on me, even when I was out misbehaving in the worst possible ways. But so I get into college and into a place where I could no longer afford to do all the crazy stuff, and I found myself in a little church service, a group called Solid Rock, absolutely amazing little independent church, and accepted the Lord for the first time. It's kind of interesting. I got my call before I really accepted the Lord. Now I don't know if that violates anybody's theology, but that's that's how I perceive it. I accepted the Lord. It was a clear change in my life, a clear change in my perspective. I changed how I functioned at that moment, and immediately moved into kind of an evangelical mode. Had an absolute blast in that church. It was just wonderful. And before too long, had that sense again of a call. There's a guy out there preaching. That's where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be bringing that message. And in fact, I had a message to bring. It was right here. I could bring it, right? And yet I was too immature and too young, and they didn't know what to do with it, and had all these other issues going on. I wasn't that far out of the drug scene. So I had some things I had to heal, had some work I had to do. But of course, they didn't understand what that was, and it caused problems. And eventually, I had to leave that church for various reasons. But one of them was that I felt a strong need to lead, and I wasn't ready to lead. That wasn't their fault, right? That was really my fault. Anyway, so I go off and back up into the crazy scene, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. I find myself, here's where the story starts to get interesting. I find myself having my first child, my son. And I woke up one morning with this clear sense in me that I said, Bob, your mom raised you and put faith in you, gave you her faith, and you benefited from that. What are you going to give your son? And my answer was, I have nothing to give. Answer is, well, that's right. Right now, you have nothing to give. And that's all I remember of that interaction. There was this sense that I owed my son something that I could not give. And turns out there was a little Nazarene church not too far from where we lived, and my wife grew up Nazarene, and so we went and joined this church, and in short order found ourselves at home. Right, found ourselves just clicked right in that environment, wonderful church. And it wasn't too long before that same call came right back, the same exact thing. You're supposed to be up there doing that. You're supposed to be at that pulpit. That's where you're supposed to be. And the call does not go away. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade out. Sometimes we can ignore it for a while. We can push it aside and cover it up and mask it like we do. But the call came back, and I accepted that. Although this time, now what? I'm 32 years old now, and I've got family and responsibilities and dependencies. And so now I want to put conditions on the call. How do you think that worked out? Not all that good, but I did. I didn't know any better, so I put conditions on it, and the Lord began to conquer those conditions one at a time. Began to show me where my true dependency was. He worked in ways to prove to me who He was and what He was up to. And I got a real old-fashioned Nazarene sanctification at one point. Accepted a full healing for all of that. So now I had the maturity that I didn't have before. So now I was really ready to do something. So that was no longer an excuse, right? I'm not ready. Actually, you are. So all that got handled. And then there's one specific event. I don't know if I ever told you this story before, Fisk. I don't know if I told you this. But I come to the point where I accepted, okay, Lord, if I'm supposed to preach, then let's do this thing. I mean, I don't know what that means, but let's do it. And so I'd intellectually kind of accepted this, but I hadn't accepted it all kind of full down inside myself. Because it would mean a change of lifestyle. It would mean a change of everything I was doing. And I remember sitting in district assembly, and in the middle of a worship service, just a wonderful worship service, just having a great time praising the Lord and just singing. And I had my senior pastor right beside me, and he's a wonderful man of God. And I felt this sense of are you going to be my servant? And I'm going, well, I want to be. I'd like to be. I really ought to be. And then now this is, again, I might violate someone's theology here, so you can help me out. But I felt a hand come down on the top of my head and on my shoulders, as if 3 fingers on my head and 2 fingers on one on each shoulder, and he began to push down on me. I had this pressure.
There was nobody around?
Well, no. There was no giant hand up there. There was nobody behind me with a giant hand, but there was this sense of pressure pushing me down in my seat. And I'm being pushed down in my seat. Now, it's an uncomfortable seat. It's not like it's not like this chair, And I'm going, I didn't know what that meant exactly. And I'm having this argument with the Lord about whether I was really going to be His servant or not. Whether it was really going to give it all. And at one point I was all scrunched down in the chair, and I'm having a hard time breathing at this point. And this went on for about 15 minutes. And Dick Clifford, my pastor, knew exactly what was going on. He wouldn't help me. He looked at me and laughed. Seriously, okay? Well, Dick, he went, just figure it out, right? And at some point I had enough. I said, yes. 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 And immediately the hand gets released, and I find myself in a new place in worship, and a new place in connection with the Lord. And I've been saying yes ever since. Okay, right? It doesn't matter what he's up to. It's a yes at this point. I might doubt my understanding of the Lord. I might doubt my understanding of the Word. I might not understand his will. But I know that he will have his way. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've been convinced of that one. So anyway, so that's kind of the backdrop for all of this. And I found myself, repeatedly experiencing the Lord's hand in motion. That was the most dramatic. I mean, how many times does the Lord grab somebody and push you to a chair? I don't know if that's common. I don't know. All I know is that's what I experienced. All I know that's what I saw. Found out later that I'm not the only person that's happened to. Huh. That's happened to several people. Huh. Okay, the exact same thing or similar sorts of things. Huh. Kind of like John Wesley speaking about the feeling of being strangely warmed in his sanctification event. Mine was similar to that. So again, not everybody has that experience. The Lord's experience is different for everybody. Anyways, so that's kind of the background. Yeah, this is an interesting story for the call.
Okay.
All right. So I decided that it's time for me to get serious in ministry. I was basically finishing my degree here at NTS. I was getting near a point of ordination. All that was going on. And so I started looking for a church to serve in. And I've got this business background. I've got a technology background. And there's a church in Chicago that needed an executive pastor to do their business and to be a CFO for the church and to run their IT organization. And I had all those skills. And conversations with that pastor basically got accepted, got an offer to become the executive pastor of the church. Now, that's not a teaching pastor position. I was called to teach. Okay, and so but there was something that seemed to be wrong about that. Some part of my spirit was not connecting with this. There was some part of me that wasn't quite there. And
but it may have fit all logically, though, right?
Everything else fit. All the business logic fit. It was perfect. Couldn't ask for better. Good wage, man. Okay, big, fast-growing church, wonderful, right? And I'm tortured about this. So I went to take my dog on a long walk, which is how I get a lot of my praying done. And I get some distance away from the house. We turn around, we're heading back toward the house, and I have this sense. Now, again, I don't know that anybody else heard this voice, okay? But I heard a voice, okay, right? And it was something like this: "You will preach in liberty."
Like an audible voice?
Well, this just, it's what I heard.
The sense and presence?
It's what I heard. Okay. I don't know if anybody else heard anything.
Oh, okay.
What I heard. Okay. You are to be senior pastor in liberty. And I found myself on the ground. Okay, right? And of course, at this point, I know not to say no. Okay, and I know not to say, well, maybe, right? And so I accepted that. I said, well, I guess that's that. I guess I'm not going to Chicago. Now that was, I think, June 17th of that year. And I found out that at the Liberty Church of the Nazarene, I knew nothing about these people. June 17th, that very evening, at that very time, they were praying for their future pastor.
Oh, wow.
They had, for the first time, through the guidance of the district, decided to start praying for their future pastor. They had a breakthrough that night in terms of their own sense of what they were going to get. So we saw that combination of events as clearly the Lord speaking and moving. No question the Lord called me into that church. Now, for those that know anything about that church, that church struggles a lot. There are some major issues in that church. There are moral issues. There are stuff I can't even get to on camera that is just pretty nasty stuff. And so going
back then or now or both?
Certainly back then.
Okay.
And as far as I can tell, nothing's actually been healed or changed. So I would think it would be the same, although I don't have the evidence for that. So I get to this church and we have a wonderful time. It's amazing. Like the second Sunday we were there, we had a healing. Okay, now if you were to look for a sign for God's hand in motion, what would it be? A healing. Right? It's a woman that had a messed up ankle, right? And it was messed up, and we saw this foot turn. Right in front of us. Okay? Wow. Nobody planned this. It's just she'd been there for a long time. It just kind of happened. Right?
They asked for a prayer or something?
Her leg was hurting her. How long had it hurt you? 30 years. Right? Because it's twisted like this. It's kind of right? We saw this as wonderful. This is perfect. Who could ask for better? This is right. The Lord called us here. The timing was right. We didn't really want to come here, but we're here. This is what the Lord called us. Now we see the evidence of His hand in motion. But there was another. I'm as convinced that there's a devil as I am convinced that there's a God. And the devil saw that something was happening there and put his foot straight into it. and caused all hell to break loose, basically. So now in terms of the call, what do I do? Do I now doubt the call? God, you didn't know what you were doing here. Right?
Right.
God, please change your mind. No. My understanding of this is the Lord put me there to deal with that situation, which we proceeded to do.
Well, now, see, from my perspective, I'm thinking, well, things didn't really all change that much. How can you tell it was God?
You mean,
Because you said things you don't really see that they might have changed all that much since that you've been there.
Actually, a bunch of things. Oh, no, I haven't been back in a couple of years, so I don't know what's changed in those few years.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what's changed, but I know what changed by the time they asked us to leave. Okay.
Okay.
There was a cleansing, in fact, that happened in that church. And it was, again, I don't want to get into a whole bunch of it on video, but the bottom line is that the Lord did have his will done. And his will was clearly not that church would be healed. His will was that I would go through a bunch of learning very fast that I wouldn't have gotten any other way, which I clearly did. And there was a bunch of other folks that went through a bunch of learning that they wouldn't have had any other way. It has been my experience that there's two ways to learn to swim, in the shallow end or in the deep end. Okay, right? The deep end's a lot faster, okay, but it's nowhere near as much fun. Okay, so I learned to swim in those waters pretty quick. Pretty quick. It was an interesting. That whole story would take hours to tell.
Well, I would. That's what I kind of wanted to hear, but I don't have that much time on this video, so I just want to know. Wow, so much of this seems like a lot of it is nothing that you can prove to anybody else. Yep. All this is inside. Yep. How can you tell that this was a call? A, B, where is there evidence that any of this has worked? And how can you tell the people that this is not just all coincidence?
Some fantasy.
Yeah,
some fantasy. Yeah, believe me, I've had that thought. Okay, I started out in my career as a scientist, an electrical engineer, and so I have an evidentiary-based way of thinking, and so I have these same thoughts. I do. The reason why I love the story of the call to liberty is because of the timing of it. I mean, I come home and I tell my wife, look, I don't know what this was, but I think this might have been the Lord speaking. We're supposed to be in liberty. She went, where's that? No idea. And then we find, within days, we get this call from the district. I mean, literally, and we end up in liberty. And then afterwards, we tell the story. We said, well, that we were called liberty back in June. They said, well, what date exactly was that? And then we sat in a board meeting and did the dates and figured it out. That was that same day. That was that same day. And we had a sense that the Lord was in this at that moment, right? I've had many of those kinds of moments, but that was the one where the most people were involved, right? So I've come to understand my Lord in a way where I don't doubt him anymore. When he moves that way, I don't doubt him anymore. And that's a strange thing.
Well, it would be hard not to if you had a big experience like that.
And more than one.
Yeah.
And more than one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like Paul had many of these experiences. Paul was a nutcase. Well, he had lots of data behind that. As I've said, when I started this, I'm privileged to have had some experiences a lot of folks haven't had. And I still have yet to see what all the Lord's going to do with all that. But it's been pretty powerful so far. We've done some interesting work.
So what do you feel was the kind of end result of do you feel like do you feel special? Like, it sounds like the end result was that you learned and that the church learned and that was it. The logical side of my head says the church should have been healed. It should grow from broken to healed to growing. Exactly. But I don't see. And then what happened? How did you leave the church?
It was very messy.
Okay.
It's very messy. Certain individuals did not want me there and reacted violently to be sure that I left.
It sounds dangerous, like guns and knives and stuff, or just...
It was as violent as you can get without taking a baseball bat to somebody.
Wow.
Okay, it was pretty nasty. And I went back and found myself in much prayer again, of course, obviously, at this point. And all the advice I was getting and the help I was getting said that, if the Lord gave you a call like that and he hasn't specifically revoked that call, then you are not to leave. And so my answer was, I can't leave. I'd love to leave. I don't want to sit in the middle of this. Who wants to sit in the middle of this?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to go, please. But the answer was no. And so it was there was a struggle. I think what the Lord wanted was that struggle to happen. You realize the Lord could cancel all evil right now if he wanted to. Like this. Done. But he doesn't. Why? That's the question we need to answer. Because he has set up his kingdom on this earth, and there's another kingdom, which is the devil's kingdom. And we're supposed to be at war. We are indeed at war. The point right now is to be at war. We are to be struggling with the devil and his works. That's what's supposed to be happening right now. Now, we're not going to win every battle. Not going to happen. Every saint that ever went to the cross and was crucified for Christ or was burned at the stake or whatever had to face the same thing. Lord, did you not help me? The Lord says, yeah, I did, actually. You're doing exactly what I want you to do. And they would die in joy. That's the true nature of the call. So you're willing to go to the cross.
So part of your call feels like it's a call to suffer, but to grow.
If suffering's not a part of your call, then you miss something. That's the truth of it. If you think the call is all fun and candy and goodies and good times, then you really need to stop and think for a minute. Because what did Jesus do? Jesus got, first of all, he was cast out by his own people in his own hometown, right? And then he was chased off of one hill after another, and then beat on by his own religious leadership. It was not much fun what Jesus did, and yet he did it. Why? Paul says, for the joy of operating as God's representative on this earth. It's exactly why I do what I do, and why I can't just turn away from it. I can't just say, "Oh, that was all wrong. I pretended." It doesn't work that way, right?
Right. So how did you go from I can't leave to now you're in a different church?
The process was an interesting one. There was a gradual sense that we were gonna get. Well, no, we basically pushed it to a vote. And again, I made it clear to the district leadership and the church leadership that I just assumed leave, but I didn't call myself here. Okay, and it came down to the large church vote, one vote difference. It was one vote. So, interestingly, I am convinced that there is nothing holy about 51%, and there it was right in front of us. And so I had actually, issued my resignation previously, and there was enough weight on the board where they refused to accept it. So this was interesting. This whole thing was tied in a huge knot. But eventually we walked out of there on the promise that things would get dealt with at that church. So that's how we left. I still believe I'm supposed to be pastoring at that church. So we'll see.
At that particular pastor?
We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Are you currently pastoring?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
I've taken a break right now. Okay. I went into homeless ministry, serving the homeless and the lost and the broken, and that takes a lot of energy to do that. So I've kind of backed out of all that for the moment, and we'll see where the Lord wants us. But at this particular time, He's called us to back out and to take a break. And it turns out we desperately needed a break. I tend to run fast at everything, and I wasn't paying as much attention to my family, and they really needed a break. So, and I think I did too. Let's make that pretty clear.
Okay. Wow, that sounds like a really interesting story.
It is an interesting story.
Yeah, and I can't wait to hear the rest of it, the end of it, to see if you ever get back, or if you don't, maybe.
We're going to get back. We're going to get back. It's not done. 3 or 4 times a week, the Lord gives me a message, a direction, a something, and I put some of it up on my Facebook, so my Facebook friends can get some of that. So I'm still preaching, it's just in a different way.
Oh.
But those are the exact same things that would mature into a full message where I don't have a chance to bring that. And I'm still getting chances to preach at various churches and teach. I'm teaching a Bible study at the Grand Avenue Temple downtown, for instance, and I'm helping with a little church up in Liberty, another church up in Liberty. So I guess still get to do some teaching and preaching, but it's nowhere near as intense. It's much more relaxed, much more of a background. I'm not in the upfront leadership position, so I've backed off into a more quiet position. And I think this is just where I want to be for now. I think well, actually, I did not choose this. Again, the Lord chose this, so I'm in this more quiet position because He put me here. So I'm going to accept that, or I have actually accepted that, and kind of relax into that, and it's all good. At some point, I'm going to get pushed back into the full groove again.
Wow. Okay. So you're just waiting
just being peaceful, learning a new way to pray, learning a new way to connect, and learning a new way to serve. And I probably wouldn't have that opportunity if I was running fast. There's the weekly pattern of preaching every Sunday and teaching, once a week kind of a thing. It drives you in a certain way. When you pull out of that drive, that internal mechanism of seeking the Lord and seeking His Word doesn't change, but it changes the way it's presented, changes the way it operates internally. And it's a good thing, I think, to step back and learn a new way to hear.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.